How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Caswell Customs. Vinny here, and today we're working back on Brent's diesel. So we're finally getting into the motor. So before you saw that we did the fuel system, and that's obviously so that it can handle the upgraded power that is going to be coming to it. So we got Brent here. So Brent, what do we got going on?
Well, we're going to be doing a basic top end rebuild. So we got some Hamilton push rods. I actually ordered heavy duty push rods and they sent me extreme duty, the 12mm ones. Not complaining, but that's pretty cool. To pair with it, we got Hamilton 103 valve springs. We got some head studs to go in there, and then while we're in the top end, we're going to do new injectors. We got industrial injection injectors. So again, we're going to try to soak up as much power as we can until the compound turbo set comes in. But other than that, it's going to be a pretty simple install. Give you some tricks and tips that we know. It's not going to be too far in depth. There's obviously better videos out on the market right now. We'll send a couple links in the bottom of the description. But we're going to send you along on the trip here and see how it goes. You're going to start off by first disconnecting your battery, because we got to disconnect a couple wire harnesses, so you start there always. Next, you got 6 10mm bolts on the top of your valve cover. You can do those, and then you got your wire harness pigtails, and then for my S&B intake horn, I got Allen keys, so you're going to take that off, and then you'll be good to go. Alright, once you got your two injector harness plugs disconnected, you got one in the back for the back three, one in the front for the first 3 injectors. You can lift your valve cover off, and then we'll start working on the injector harness. Alright, next up we're going to have each injector. It's going to have 2 tiny 8mm studs for the wire harness. Anytime you're disconnecting those, just ease into it. The last thing you want is the stud on the top of your injector to snap off. So again, 6 injectors, 2 studs each, 8mm. So back to me talking about being careful. You can see when I try to take this off, you can see the entire injector rotating. So you're going to want to somehow support that injector so you don't, again, snap a stud or break anything off. And anytime you're working on the top valve train, you want to stuff paper towel, towels, something clean everywhere you can, because the last thing you want is for something to fall in there, and that can make for a real bad day. Once you got your injector harness out, you can just go ahead and check it for cracks. These are, with all the heat that these motors generate, the wiring is super susceptible to cracking. So just give it a once over, check it out. Yours might be good. Don't worry about these nuts, they're all captured, so they stay in there. Clean it off and on to the next. Alright, once you got all the valve cover and the wire harness taken off, now you're going to work on your rocker bridges and your entire rocker assembly. 2 10mm bolts up on top, and then we can take our push rods out. Just be careful when you're taking them out. Remember what cylinder these came from. They got to go back in the same order in which you take them out. And when you lift this up, you got your trunnion in between each rocker, and then you got they'll pop out. So just careful not to drop anything down there. And then just again keep them in the same order of which you take them out. So once you're taking your push rods out for these back couple cylinders, the push rod's obviously going to be too tall. It's going to be coming in contact with your cab. But on the top of the cab, there's a plug, so you remove the plug, you can fish the push rod up and out, something the engineers actually got right. Alright, once you got your push rods out, you can move on to your fuel lines. so you can take out your feed tubes and then in turn take out your injectors, because you can't take out your injectors without taking your feed tube out. So the fuel lines are going to be 3/4 inch wrench. Just break it loose, one after another. And then each one, or not each one, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the last 5 except for the front one. Each one has a bracket. Looks like those are probably going to be little 8 mil. That way you can actually take it off from the fuel rail itself. And again, make sure you're just covering everything up. The last thing you want to get is any dirt, dust, or grime inside your fuel system, because it's obviously after your filtration, especially when you're putting on new injectors when they can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000. And don't forget about your last one in the back, because it's tucked up back there. It's going to be a pain. But most of the time you have to remove this back hook plate. That way you can actually get some clearance back there. Alright, once your fuel lines are out, next is your feed tubes. The retaining nut is going to be a 15/16. You got 6 feed tubes that go to each injector, so you got to remove those before you can take your injectors out. So your feed tube usually is, it's got a little ball detent on it, so she's in there pretty tight sometimes. They make a tool specifically to remove it. But if you don't have one of those, you can just re-put on your feed line and take a little pry bar and pop her out, and it'll come out for you. So right there's those 2 ball detents with the O-ring, which seals it into your head. Same thing, usually if you're doing new injectors, you want to replace your feed tube with a Cummins or Bosch OEM spec feed tube. Try not to get any of those eBay ones straight from China. I wouldn't trust them. So remove your 6 feed tubes, then you can go into your injectors. Alright, once you got all your feed lines out, you can go to your injectors now. It's going to be 2 8mm bolts holding the carriage down. You're just going to want to do it in increments or steps on either side. Be careful when you're doing this. You don't, again, want to break off the top studs on the top of your injector. You're going to be at a loss if you do that. I like to remove the screws, because generally the injector is pretty well seated. So sometimes you might have to give it a little pry action. It's got O-rings on there, so you can see. I mean, these injectors got what, 100 almost 70,000 miles on there. They're pretty dirty. And the biggest thing is, when you pull your injector out, you want to make sure this copper crush washer comes out with it. Your new injectors will have new crush washers, and you got to make sure it's out. If not, you got to take a little probe and fish it out from the bottom of your head. But make sure that comes out and you're all good. Just continue that with all 6 injectors. Alright, now that all the injectors are out, next step we're going to do head studs. So since we're not lifting the head or removing the head, I don't have a reoccurring or a head gasket issue, so we're going to leave the head on. So we're going to start with removing the existing head studs or their head bolts with 1 and 2 right here, and then go through the torque sequence. Alright, we got all the head studs in. There's a little bit of a process. You got to do them one by one, again, because we're not lifting the head. But all the head studs are in. Next process is we're going to remove the trans, because just got a shipping confirmation that transmission parts should be here. Then we're going to start barring over the motor, find top dead center, and start on the Hamilton valve springs. Look at this. We got Tim's Cummins, just doing a quick oil change on it. We got the white knight. Everything's going pretty good. We got the truck bed. Everything's marked. We just got to cut the holes for the shock towers or the bed cage. We got the old tow rig here. Just getting ready to pull the trans, getting everything out. Drive shafts are out. Just working on the lines now. How's it going over here?
Oh, it's going. It's been better, but it's going.
Yeah.
That's still a problem.
Still a mess over here. Well, as you can see, we got one side the leaf spring hanger, leaf springs in, the shock mounts in. This side went together pretty well. Looks like he's just getting it bolted up here. Yeah, everything's clean, welds, powder coated, looking good. Alright, we got the transmission out, so now we can start stripping that down, clean it, that way we can drop it off and get that built. Alright guys, so now we're working on injectors. So anytime you're doing new injectors, you got an O-ring and a little metal snap ring up here. So go ahead and get some good assembly lube, grease, lube, oil, anything. Lube up the body, make sure you're putting that in there. Same thing with the feed tube. So you got an O-ring right here and two little ball detents. So get those oiled or greased up. Clean up your hardware, and then on the mounting surface, where the rocker bolts and injector bolts go, usually they're filled with oil. So I just take either a can of air, blow those out, that way you're not screwing those the hardware in there with a bunch of oil stuck in there. Other than that, it's going to be a 4-step sequence. So we're going to start with the injector, bolt that down, then go to the feed tube, then go back to the injector, and then back to the feed tube nut to finish it off. So let's get started. Alright, first injector and feed tube is all set. So like I said, it's going to be in a 4-step process. First, you're going to do the preload on your injector. That's going to be 44 inch-pounds to seat the injector. Then once you're done, back it off a couple turns just to relieve some pressure. Then you go to your feed tube, pre-torque that to 11 foot-pounds to ensure that the feed tube is secured. And then you're going back to your injector. Your injector final torque specs are going to be 89 inch-pounds. Okay, 89 inch-pounds on the injector. Then you're going back to your feed tube for a final torque of 37 foot-pounds. So a 4-step alternating process, not hard. Just take it step by step and don't misread those readings. All right, guys, got the injectors and the feed tubes. All that's torqued down. A couple tips that I ran into. Anytime you're using your torque wrench, be careful and cautious of how fast you're swinging it, because you will come in contact with these studs. So just take your time. And second point, anytime you're doing something to inch-pounds or foot-pounds with your torque wrench, make sure you're going in smooth, consistent patterns. What I mean by that is don't do a 6-inch circle, or 3/4 of a turn over here and then a 1/4 of a turn on this side. No, you got to do it on an even turn on each side. So go from the front to the back, seat that collar down evenly, and then go to your feed tubes. So after this, now we're going to our rocker and push rod assembly. So let me put you up and stay tuned. Alright, next is push rods. So these are the 12mm from Extreme Duty from Hamilton. So just put some assembly lube or grease on the bottom. I wait to do the top, that way I can get a good grip on it when I'm putting it in there. So you're just going to gently set it down in this hole, and you'll just feel around. and you'll feel the contact when it makes it. Then you can just gently let go, and you'll know it's not going anywhere right there. But once it's there, then you can put some more assembly lube or grease on the top. These are all new mechanical, physically wearing parts, so you never want to put them in dry. So just lather them up and then get on with your rocker assembly. All right, next is your rocker assembly, and then you got your rocker bridge. You'll notice on the rocker bridge, one side has a little raised nipple that goes towards the passenger side of the truck. So you're going to set that on your valves and then set down your rocker assembly. It's going to be two 10 mil bolts or studs, and again, lather everything up with some assembly lube, new or old. Clean it off and never put it in dry. One last tip, again, cover everything with some type of towels. You don't want to drop anything down in here, but take a rag, clean off the surface where you're bolting everything to, bottom of the trunnion or the rocker assembly as well. You just want a clean surface when you're going to screw everything down. Same goes for the locations where the screws or the studs go. Those are usually filled with oil, so you can either take a can of air or air hose or a Q-tip, clean it out. That way when you're screwing in the stud or the bolt, it's going to get good contact. How's she riding?
Not like perfect because the shocks are literally doing nothing right now.
Yeah, I gotta get them tuned and filled. Oh, we got a little fire extinguisher mount. That's pretty cool. But looking good. Dude, overall.
Awesome. Freaking love it.
Alright guys, so got the rockers and the injectors, everything's put back together, torqued down to spec. Next step is valve lash. So the adjustments is going to be an Allen key and a 14mm wrench. So we got all of them loose right now. But first we have to find top dead center. So we got to go under the truck. Alright, you got to go under the truck. You're going to have a barring tool. I'll leave the part in the description. So you're going to look at the bottom of your crank. You'll see a little marking TDC. That means top dead center. So what I like to do is I'm going to put a piece of tape, blue tape over it, mark the line with a Sharpie or a pen. That way when you rotate it to the top of the motor and you're up top in the engine bay, looking down, you can see it a lot easier than, a lot easier than that. On this, I mean, it's a 07, so it's a little rusted. So let's do that. Alright, there we go. You get a nice clean line on the edge of the TDC. And I also went ahead and put a Sharpie dot on either side, so when I'm rotating that over, I can at least know that I'm coming up on my mark. So we're going to rotate it over to the top, go back up top, and then I'll show you how to check valve lash. Alright guys, we are back up top. So you can, I doubt you can see in there. Maybe you can. You'll see the tape line on the top of the crank. Anyways, top dead center. So you got a 14mm nut and a number 5 Allen key for your stud. You're gonna loosen that up, and you'll notice there's some play with your rocker bridges. So go ahead and you can write this down if you want. You don't have to. This is my little cheat sheet. So first, you're gonna do your intake 1, 2, and 4 cylinders, and then exhaust 1, 3, and 5 cylinders. And then you're going to rotate it over 360 degrees and then do intake 3, 5, and 6, exhaust 2, 4, and 6. Now, if you look on the side of your stock valve cover, it's going to show you the valve lash. Of course, the motor's got to be cold. Intake is 10 thousandths, exhaust is 26 thousandths. Those are kind of just, let's see if it can focus. Anyways, those are kind of just like the median. Here's the intake and exhaust minimums and maximums. So you can do minimum of 6 thousandths to a maximum of 15. Exhaust, you can do a minimum of 21 and 34. So you can go ahead and play around with it if you want. I'm probably just gonna get a stick around with what Cummins suggests. So you're going to take your feeler gauge. This is, just for reference, a 10 thousandths. You're going to stick it. Your intake is going to be your small rocker. Your exhaust is going to be your big one. So obviously it's real loose right now, but just for reference, we're going to take it and stick it just under or in between the trunnion where it makes contact. So put your number 5 Allen key, loosen everything up. I like to kind of start tight and go backwards from there. It's all preference. So I like to bring it up a little bit. You're going to bring it down onto it. You want a little bit of contact. So that slide in between, nice, right there. So once you find a little bit of contact on the feeler gauge, go ahead and tighten down that 14mm Caswell or that lock nut, and you will be good to go. Alright, we just finished up doing intake and exhaust, 1, 2, and 4, and 1, 3, and 5. So now we're going to rotate the engine 360 degrees using that TDC mark, that top dead center, and then we're going to revisit and come back and do this sequence now. So let's rotate it over and then get back up here. Alright guys, just like that, intake and exhaust of cylinders 1 through 6 are good. Some people like to roll the engine over a couple more times and double check or go through it again, but I still got to do a heat cycle for my head studs. So we're going to put the injector harness back on, fire it up, get it up to operating temp, shut it off, let it cool down a little bit, tear this all back apart, and then re-torque the head studs. And then that's when I'm going to do a more thorough check on my valve lash, just to double check everything. You don't have to, but I'm going to. But first we're going to do a Fleece coolant bypass kit. So this is a 2007. It's got an automatic trans. So right here we got Fleece coolant bypass kit. If you want part number, let's see if it'll, so this goes on the back of the engine. There's a freeze plug we're going to knock out. I'll show you that. It's going to be a new 180 degree thermostat. So that goes in the back of the motor. And this is going to route all the piping. I'll get more into the depth in this in a minute, but let me get everything prepped and ready, and then I'll set you up for that. Alright, so this is a little easier for me since my transmission's already out. But for the Fleece coolant bypass, this freeze plug, number one, it's a pretty common problem in high boost scenarios for that to burst out. And on the back 6 and 5 cylinders, there's always cooling issues. So Fleece came up with this coolant bypass. Long story short, you have to take a punch or a pry bar, knock that out, or just dimple it, get some pliers on it, and pull out. And then the new screws are going to be utilized over here, and it's going to be a 180 degree thermostat that's going to send fresh coolant circulating through the entire block. So get a pry bar, punch, start dimpling that, and get that out. Alright, a little trick I just learned is make sure, find the left and the right holes in the block where you're going to thread your bolts into, and clean them out. Mine had some dirt stuck in there, and the last thing you want to do is try to over torque it and snap a bolt off. That's just not the greatest area. So throw some lube in there, scrape it out, run the bolt in a couple times and make sure it works. Next, once you're going to press it in, find where it's going to go and wait for the audible click. Once you hear that click, you know it's seated, and then you can start putting on your bolts. Alright, once you do that, once you route your line from your back housing, time to remove your normal thermostat housing. Alright, once you get that off, you can remove your thermostat. You can replace it if you want. This one doesn't have that many miles on it. Careful, there's a little O-ring. Once you remove that, take that red Scotch Brite they send, clean off the surface. You want a good clean surface for when you install all this stuff. So put your O-ring back, install your thermostat. They're going to send new hardware, longer bolts. These are now going to be 10 millimeter. And then you got your spacer block. This is only going to go one way. You can see the laser etched F. The top has a little gasket. First, put a little bit of assembly lube or grease or oil, anything on those threads. Thread it into your hose, then you can set it on and get to installing it. Alright guys, sorry for jumping around a little bit, but so we got the injector harness back on. So next step pretty much is to do a hot retorque. So we're going to get the truck up to operating temperature. We're going to start it up. As soon as it gets to operating temperature, we're going to shut it off, let it cool down for a little bit, tear everything back down, retorque the head studs, and then we can do the final assembly, put everything back together, and then we should be good to go. But we just want to give a little point out to when you're putting on these captured nuts for the wire harness on the injector studs, be careful. Factory torque specs for these is like 11 inch-pounds. Don't be stupid. Don't try to go crazy and overboard. You snap one of those, you're going to have a very bad day. So just be careful doing that. Other than that, we're probably going to do it in the morning, fire it up, and get that taken care of. So that's it for tonight. See you tomorrow.
Alright, so we just got the valve cover back on, everything else bolted back up, and now we're just trying to get it back up to temp and make sure that there's no air in the radiator. You stole